So, we have here with us today the one, the only, Mike Flaherty. So, Mike, you've had so much that you've done here and your involvement with Hermosa Beach, both personally and for work with the city, that we can't get to everything today. It's just not going to be possible, but I think everybody here knows that. So we're going to do our best in the amount of time that we have, and then there may have to be an addition too. Okay. So, first off, would you introduce yourself? Tell us a little bit about you.
Okay. My name is Mike Flaherty. I was born in Bradford, Pennsylvania, June 14th, 1946. It's the same date of our president. I'm a twin, my twin sister. We were both born premature. I was in an incubator for 2.5 months. I was just under 4 pounds. My sister was just over 3 pounds. So we were born, like I say, almost 2.5 months premature. That being said, Pennsylvania was the home of my father, my grandfather. My mother gave birth there because she had resigned. Both my mother and father were naval officers during World War II. They met in Oregon. She had to get out of the service when they got married. That was the rules in the 1940s. So she went back to his hometown. I was born there. I was then raised in upstate New York, in Niagara Falls, New York. My dad, after he got out of the service, was hired by DuPont. I lived until I was 19 years old. I lived in Niagara Falls. After I got out of high school, I joined the Marine Corps. I was 3.5 years in the Marine Corps. My last duty station was outside Da Nang. I came back through California for the first time, got discharged in El Toro. I then spent another 1.5 years back in upstate New York. After 2 more winters, I said, that's it. I had something else that did happen. I was fired by my boss because I had an argument. Life lesson number 1.A was never drink with your boss after work, and then get into an argument. And then he says, cut your hair or you don't have a job. I then made another decision. I went to another bar and decided by sitting next to a guy who wanted to go to California, I'll go with you. So that's how I got to California. So decisions are made at bars may not be, sometimes they work out, but may not be the best ones. My first stop in California was the Mermaid, another bar. I walked in, I saw Boots. He was sitting at the corner, his normal seat, doing a crossword puzzle, had a cup of coffee, and had just been served his first drink of the day. He only drank 1 drink, and that was his first drink. We got in there about 1 o'clock. The reason why we went to the Mermaid was the guy I drove out with knew a waitress there. So and that was the reason we came to Hermosa Beach. There was no other rhyme, reason, or anything.
That's a compelling reason,
right?
You know,
he knew somebody there. So then, several weeks later, I got my first job. I worked for a company called Swinnerton and Wahlberg. It was a major construction company. Worked in Glendale. Worked in Santa Monica. They wanted me to move to San Francisco with the company, and I said, no, I love Hermosa Beach. I was living on the Strand at Mr. Schumacher's house, if you know Dave Schumacher. And he lived at the 16th and Strand. I had the second story with a deck. I played volleyball with Matt Gage and all the people of the early 70s. I said no. About 6 months later, when my bankroll ran out of money, I applied for a position in the City of Hermosa. I was hired at $660 a month. That was my starting salary. I had some difficulties at the beginning, but moved through I was appointed to every department in Public Works. I worked in parks, streets, electrical, storm drains, building maintenance. I got promoted from maintenance 1 to maintenance 2. I was then promoted to crew leader and reopened. My first big job there was reopening the community center. I worked with a person named Alana Mastrian, who was the first hired director of the community center. Changed the title. It used to be a recreation director. She became the community resources director. From there, I was transferred back to the city yard. After 5 years, I was very happy and proud of what we did at the community center to reopen it up. My biggest chore, bar none, was getting rid of the rats. The rats were huge.
Thank you. On behalf of all of us, thank you.
They were big as the cats. And how we did it was, in some cases, we had to. If you notice on the palm trees that are still there up there, you notice some aluminum sheeting around the trees. That's to keep the rats. Once they're up, they can't get either down or back up again. And their homes were in the trees, and they were eating food and other things in the building. But I spent 6 years. We created a whole new division. I was very proud of what our crews did. Grand opening back in '82 with Mel Torme was the opening act, along with there was a singing group, a woman's singing group, very popular at the time. From there, I went back to the city yard and was kind of put under the wing of the existing foreman. Now, by that time, more than 50% of the employees that worked in the city yard either owned their house in Hermosa or rented in Hermosa Beach. So we had 18 people in the city yard. 10 to 15 of them lived in Hermosa Beach. When I left, there was only 2 of us that lived in Hermosa Beach as employees. And obviously, the most dramatic move was the values or the home pricing. It went from the boss that hired me had bought his house next to Clark Stadium for $9,000. The gentleman who was the head of electrical bought his for $13,000. Elmer Whittle lived up on 5th Street, bought his for $17,000, and they ridiculed him for buying a house for $17,000. They said it was way too much money. City manager lived right across the street, Mr. Earl Diller. After I retired, he came down to the city yard on a yearly basis. He knew nobody else in the city at City Hall. He came down with have lunch. He fired me once, and I was rehired the same day. I guess I get caught in being fired, but bottom line is, he was a gentleman. He died a couple of years back. I think the family still owns the house.
What kept you working in Hermosa, where you lived, aside from, were you ever enticed to go work for a different city once you were experienced?
Yes, I had applied several jobs outside the city in Orange County. Can't remember them now, but I was interviewed by the city of Manhattan. I was interviewed by a city down in Orange County. It was basically, I was going back to school again. I was going down to Santiago College in Orange County, and the commute was terrible. So we were looking for a promotional opportunity. My predecessor, Vern, who was my hero, died suddenly. And I was appointed temporarily, and then a year later I was made superintendent. So I was 17, almost 18 years as superintendent, with another 20 years of being employed. So I had 38 years of service with the City of Hermosa. This is my 4th term as a commissioner. I was a Public Works Commissioner, and then moved on to the Planning Commission. This is my 3rd term as being a Planning Commissioner.
That's quite the rap sheet, I have to say.
If I don't get fired from this one, I'll be okay.
I think this is firmly the fan club here, so we're not going to worry about this bunch. So you talked about, the house prices, that definitely impacting, city staffing. What are some of the other changes that you've noticed in Hermosa? Good, and, changes you like, changes you don't over the years?
Well, for sure, the houses are bigger, more square footage. When I first got here, there was only about 4 or 5. The reason why I know anything about the housing, because city crews were involved in not just inspection from Public Works, but installation. City crews used to do all the sewer hookups. So our crews were knowledgeable of not just new houses, but old houses and the repairs and so on and so forth. And sewers were the first to go. Sewers were impacted by trees and by collapsing. The original sewer system was built in 1935, so their time frame was done. So going into the houses in the 70s and 80s, were single. There were no basements. Nobody had any basements. They were built on sand. It was only the technology that caused people to get basements. And my house actually was knocked off its footing by the house building next door. Two houses, one next door to me on either side, had basements. My house slipped off its foundation. My house was brought here in 1935 from a large home up in Beverly Hills. It was trucked here. We saw pictures of it up in LA. It was two homes on our block, and ours was one of them. So.
That's right. I think Rick, you told me about that it was brought here from Beverly Hills. So, and somebody mentioned something to me earlier. Actually, I was talking to JR about an hour ago, and he said that everybody loved working with you when you were part of Public Works because you were so responsive and you were so in tune with everybody. And one of the challenges that I perceive in that position is that you not only are having to make everybody at the city happy, all the city staff, but also your community members. So what were some of the challenging aspects of trying to serve both those communities, which it seems that you made both of them very happy?
Well, there's a third part of that. It was also my co-employees. We're not thrilled with some of my decisions, but I really did have a feel for doing the things that were not political. I didn't do anything political. It was a stop sign. It was a pothole. It was a broken light fixture. It was a traffic issue. It was things like that. Or it was a neighbor. 75% of all my calls were from people who wanted to have their neighbor do something. Such as get out of my parking space or something like that. So recognizing those were very important issues with those people, I tried my best to negotiate. I would talk to. My first question was, have the person who was calling me, have you talked to your neighbor? And 90% of them said no. They don't want to be in that position. So bottom line was, I had a feel for resolving the problem, not 100% to anyone's favor, but resolving the problem. A lot of it had to do with, like I say, fix a stop sign or repaint the street, or some people were parking in someone's driveway because there wasn't a red mark on the curb to prevent that. Now that caused some anxiety, but some people didn't want T's and L's, parking spots. They wanted, without that, they thought they could get more. It all depended on the mood and the neighborhood, what that person wanted. But I was also in tune to, I got well acquainted with the Women's Club, the Garden Club, the Kiwanis Club, the Rotary Club. I'm an honorary Women's Club member. I'm an honorary.
I love that.
Right. Garden Club member. All those things, because I was in tune to that type of service. I had conversations with the city manager on a regular basis, but it was not at City Hall. It was always at nighttime or on weekends. That's when our department really shone. We responded 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, to problems that developed during a FASTA, for example, or a storm, flooding, sewer outages, electrical, all those types of things. Our crew, we were so popular because we had trucks, shovels, and men to do things. None of the other departments have anybody that can do that. The police department won't sweep the street, that type of thing. Not saying there's anything wrong with that, but that's why we were popular. We were also the highest visible outside of a police officer with orange shirts. We had, and to this day, one of my pet peeves is the city yard is in dire straits. And hopefully over the next couple of years, there'll be a resolution and a funding that will help bring that into maybe the 20th century. But we're hoping.
I asked Mike a couple questions about the oil well that used to be in the city yard because we were doing research for our upcoming exhibit that's opening Friday next week on oil drilling in Hermosa. And when I started, actually, I don't live in town, so it's all new to me, especially when I'm researching something. I started looking at it, and I'm like, that is a really small city yard. It definitely has, probably seen its glory days if it ever had them to begin with.
It really had a lot of history to the yard itself, and what was there before it was a Public Works yard. City Hall used to be on Hermosa Avenue, the fire department, the police department. The parking lot you see between Pier Avenue and 13th Street, that empty parking lot on the east side of the street, was part of City Hall complex. The building next door, which is a restaurant, different name every couple of years, was part of City Hall too. In fact, when they're doing remodel, they ran into the jail cells in the back. So in the late 50s and 60s, whatever was, the thing about the city yard was I worked with people that worked for 40 years and plus, but their dad worked for 30 years plus. Lester Randall, his dad worked from the late 30s through the 50s. He then joined the city yard in the late 50s and worked 40 years. During the 40s, 50s, and 60s, before civil service, before Myra Milius Brown, that allowed city employees to organize, it was call somebody up and get your friend. There's an opening down here. Get your friend. It was never anything but a positive return. The guys I first started working with were well in their 60s. So I was 24 years old, or 25 years old, and the guys were in their 60s.
And they told you all their secrets.
That's the one thing that I will say. I was the first superintendent hired as a superintendent without having to be the crew leader for the sewer crew, because I got called by the existing superintendent because I was the only one available in town. And the rest of the people lived out of town. They couldn't get there soon enough. So I learned the secrets of the sewer and the storm drain system by the mere fact he would give me a call and say, meet me at the city yard in 5 minutes. So those were the days where he knew I was destined or wanted to be the superintendent. So he spent a lot of time. Vern and I fished down here right off 26th Street. He was a good man, very good man. In fact, he was a professional athlete. He was an all-star state baseball player. He played ball in Clark Stadium in a semi-pro league when there was a pro league playing out of Clark Stadium in the 50s. In fact, there was a building in the southwest corner that was their locker room. I actually tore it down.
I was about to ask you what's your favorite building in town that's still there. Or, you know what, if there's one you really want to mention that's not there, that's okay too.
Well, first of all, there's 2 or 3 that are my favorites because I was part of reopening them or remodeling them. Obviously, the community center, I spent 5, almost 6 years. And if it wasn't for Rick Koenig kicked me out of there, I'd still be there.
Yeah, you've mentioned that my current office was your office.
My office for 5 years. So the community center certainly has a long-standing history of not only being knocked down in the 30s and rebuilt. There's still remnants of that. You can't, as Rick said the other night, you can't get through any of those walls. When they rebuild it after the Long Beach earthquake, the rebar is 3 or 4 times heavier than it was. Even engineers would do it today. The concrete is so thick. All the new utilities that you have to put in there are all going to be exterior mounted. There won't be anything or furred out. You'll have to build another wall outside of them.
So when somebody asks why I don't just move a picture in the museum or hang something up
No,
there,
no.
that's why.
It's built like a rock. It is a rock.
I use a different expression, but, but no, that is absolutely true.
The other building would be the Clark building. I was involved in a remodel in the 80s. It was the first time I was actually told to use an outside contractor, and contract administration then became part of my strong suit. So I feel very comfortable to say I'm glad they're doing what they're doing today, but I reopened it after just a matter of months, not years.
My goodness. Wait, you said you had 3. Is there a third one?
Yeah, I think the Bijou Theater are now had a lot of value. I still remember going in there for matinees. I still remember going in there there was a special show they had on Friday and Saturday nights. Rocky Horror Show. Things like that, I think, can have a real value. I'm glad people are doing what they're doing to it. It takes a certain type of person to maintain the value of it, historic value of it, and I think they've done a great job there myself. I do miss a theater in town. We've lost 2. The one up at the 24-Hour Fitness, there used to be a theater there. I think those, in fact, two out of those are historic buildings. Maybe all 3 of them are. The community center, the Clark building, and the theater are all historic buildings. There's only one other historic building now in town. That's a private residence on Monterey.
Yeah.
And I think that should be a personal choice, not a forced choice.
You got a question, Jim?
I did. Pat Reynolds actually hired me. Pat Reynolds, when he retired, our retirement gift to him, he worked 40 years for the city. He started in just before World War II. He lived right next door to the Clark Field. I think I mentioned his house, I think $13,000 when he bought it. He was proud of that. His retirement gift, we gave him a goat. He bought a farm up in Porterville area, and our crews loved him so much. He was such a gentleman that we went up and helped him put in, on weekends, went up and put in irrigation systems and other things for his farm. He had about 10 or 12 acres. He was going to farm it. And we lost track of him after a few years, but it was a great retirement party, especially trying to keep the goat secret in the city yard, pin it up, and then take it over to his retirement party was at the Picture House before it became now a theater.
Speaking of the Picture House, the first time I ever sat and really talked to you, I was doing research for our bar exhibit, and I was quite astonished that you remembered every special every bar had on what day, every deal in town. So when you were, and I remember you mentioning actually your desk that was in my current office, when you moved it, there were a bunch of, in the back behind the drawer, there were a bunch of checkbooks, and it had was it Hermosa Saloon?
Yes.
Yeah.
So when we got kicked out of the community center and moved back down to the city yard, the guys, my mother had bought me a desk and a chair when she was out visiting. And so I had stored all of my unused, or not unused, but NCR copies of my checks. And when the guys brought the desk down, there was a bunch of NCR copies of my checks. And I went through them. There was Boys Market. I lived on Prospect. There was Boys Market, Electric Company, Hermosa Saloon, Hermosa Saloon, Hermosa Saloon. And the third check, the handwriting was strange because I was cashing checks. And so that I had years of checks, and it was rent, electrical, Hermosa Saloon, Hermosa Saloon. So the owner of the saloon actually offered me a job. I took him up on it. I worked as a bouncer in 1978 '78, and then in '79 he put me on as a bartender, and so I really have a good feel of what the bar scene was about, not just on one side of the bar, but the other side too. I was very grateful to Popeye, who has since passed away, and Kai Startzman, who owned that bar, for hiring me. I worked for 3 years on 2 years for Friday and Saturday night. Then I was hired to work as a single bartender on Wednesday nights, and that's because that was the night that the softball league played down on Hermosa, and I had been a softball slow pitch guy for about 5 or 6 years. So the teams came in. It was a good way to have the teams come in. We sponsored the baseball team, and so on and so forth. So that
And
was
your
good.
your Public Works patch is still up there,
Yeah.
on the beam in the saloon, actually. So
Yeah.
I can verify I did find it.
Yeah, the saloon were good days. I was on a dart team. I was on the baseball team. I was a bartender there. It's still one of those places that are almost like Cheers. It was that type of place.
It definitely is. Okay, so just for my own personal
Hmm.
curiosity, you worked in the saloon and you met all the clientele. Did any of those people ever come back complaining about a painted curb later on as respectable citizens?
No, I don't remember that. There was people that came in wanting to talk city business, but quite frankly, I'm too busy as a bartender to talk in-depth city business. Um, so again, I said, "Hey, call me up tomorrow" or something like that when I was on the job. But uh, augmenting, I worked for them prior to being superintendent, obviously, but it was augmenting my salary more than anything else. But to this day, I never had as much money in my pocket as I did when I worked at the saloon.
Good tips, right?
Yeah, good tips. Good tips.
Okay,
Cash.
and then again, for my own personal curiosity, what was your craziest call that you
Oh,
got from somebody when you were in Public Works?
uh,
I understand, you may not be able
uh,
to out everybody, but
no,
what will you would be able to
there
share?
was a,
Yeah,
there
no
was a,
names.
there was
No
a,
names.
there was a lady up on Prospect. I still remember this, who was high pitched yelling, saying there was a rat in her toilet. And actually, that's a common occurrence. Rats get trapped in a dry sewer line and then find a lateral, go up a dry lateral, and end up next to a toilet with a trap in it. And they swim up the trap, and now they can't do anything. They can't swim back down through the trap. And so she was just panicked. I still remember going up there going, what am I going to do? So I grabbed the rat and I put it in a bag. And and she was all upset because she said, now I'll never be able to use that toilet again. And I'm going, this is a lifetime experience. Honest, this will never happen again. This is a once in a million. I tried to talk her into flushing the rat down. She wouldn't have it. She just couldn't do it. So I said, I grabbed the rat and I put it in a bag and I walked out. But her, yeah, right. That was something that she couldn't get over. She really wanted to get rid of the toilet, and started, just one of those things. That
I
it was
can't
silly.
blame her. In fact, I think we all have Mike's cell phone here, probably in our cell phone. So I'm going to call you if this ever happens to me.
But it
Rick?
wasn't a rat. It was a tiny little mouse that got.
Oh, it was a mouse. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, we have a question from Rick in the back.
Actually, more of a statement. Since we're all here kind of celebrating Mike,
Mhm.
we all call our dear friend. I think a couple things I'd like to share that speaks to the content of this man's character. Number one, I can't remember how many years ago it was, but there was a woman that was a crossing guard at Valley School. She was taking care of her grandchildren. She was on a very, very limited budget. Her house had been disheveled, and Kiwanis decided, well, you know what, we'll get some people together, we'll do some painting. This man finds out about it. He makes the proper phone calls. He shows up with a dump truck and a skip loader, completely regrades her whole yard, loads up the dump truck and drives off, and really didn't even want a damn donut. That's number one. That's the kind of guy we're listening to.
Well, I just want to say that was done with the authority of the city manager.
I said you meant like
Yeah.
disclaimer.
Yeah.
The other thing I want to talk about is like you said, when we kind displaced to do the museum expansion, which, you know, you had a lot of stuff in there. That was, it made the guys hurry up and knew how important it was, but quite frankly, building that museum would have been a lot more expensive and a lot longer and a lot more difficult if Mike hadn't been the suit up and show up kind of guy. He'd show up in a city truck with your dog Jelly Bean riding shotgun and say, "What do you guys need?" And it was a jackhammer to bust up the concrete or whatever it was. You didn't even have to ask twice. It was done. And I can truly say without him, it would have been a whole lot bigger project.
And it continues today because we have a superintendent that does the same thing. So thanks.
Absolutely. No, I just this week I needed help with something from Public Works, and Mike gave him a call, and I was so hesitant to follow up because every time I drive into town I see them all over doing all kinds of natural disaster work. And I finally, broke down and texted them and said, "Hey, can you still help me with that?" And they came right over, they troubleshooted, they helped me with the problem, and they were absolutely fantastic. So
the negatives, Mike.
Okay, you had a question?
Yeah, you were saying that the homes went for $17,000. What was the city budget back in the day, and how did they make their money, like the revenue?
Wow.
If you know, I was just kind of wondering.
I know that during the 80s, when budgeting was part of my responsibility, it was in the tens of millions, not 45 million. The capital, if it wasn't for very smart city managers and finance directors who realized we had to start budgeting for replacement funds, we created a fund for vehicle replacements. It included everything from compressors to pickup trucks to police vehicles. There was a panic in Hermosa in the 70s and 80s because they were panic buying. We were driving around trucks that were 40 years old. They had holes in the gas, the fumes were coming up into the cab. So I just remember in the tens of millions in the 80s. Jim would probably have a better recollection of the budget, but it didn't go up to the 30s and 40s until 2000 and something like that. So, but remember, I started off at $660 a month, and that was and now I would say that the biggest improvement has been in capital funding and reserves. There was no reserves when I first started. We were, like I say, living on a shoestring. So I think the largeness of the budget today includes some real strong reserve money, which I think is extremely important to cover yourself for disasters such as we've witnessed just in the last, not even Hermosa disasters, but earthquake. We've never suffered a big earthquake in Hermosa. So, yes, sir.
Do you have any stories to tell about building the pier
or absolutely
changing the strand wall or
anything
like that?
I think one of the biggest changes in the downtown is obviously Pier Avenue to Pier Plaza. There's no doubt about it. But the second biggest would be the pier itself. In the 70s, they used to have a boat that would, in fact, if you go out on the pier, you'll see that the pylons on the pier on the south side are straight up and down. The pilings on the west side and the east and the north side are at an angle. And there was a reason for that. We used to have a deck below the pier that had a pump that pushed water up and fed a fish tank up above. That's why the building was there. It had live bait. There were also people that came from Redondo fishing boats that would pick up fishermen and drop off fishermen and give us live bait. So the biggest loss on that pier, as far as I'm concerned, the building going away was not a loss. It was a disaster.
Do you remember when that building was taken down?
Yeah, it was in the 90s. So during the 80s, the waves that came through in the 80s washed off the below deck, took the pumps away, knocked the stairwell off. The only thing was left of the stairwell that was dangling in midair. It's taken 20 years of capital improvement repairs to just bring the pier back into a safe position. The latest director did a great job, as far as I'm concerned. There's a little background to when it was remodeled the first time, second time, we're about stage 5 of remodeling the pier. But the biggest disaster, as far as I was concerned, was the failure to maintain that a fisherman type thing. There are no fish anymore out there. There were pictures in that building that showed 40 and 50-pound sea bass caught right off Hermosa Pier, halibut, the whole shot. So actually the landscape of our sand has changed dramatically. If you look at pictures from the 30s, 40s, 50s, you'll see that we've gained 150 feet of beach. It's mostly because of two different the rocks in the Marina del Rey and the rocks in Redondo caused the swirling of the sand. I mean, we're talking that alone changed the outfalls for the storm drains, the sewer, and everything else that had to do with maintaining anything west of the Strand Wall. The Strand Wall on the south end of town is got a footing of 9 feet. The Strand Wall on the north, from 22nd up, has got only a 4 foot. There was a reason for that. The beach was 150 feet narrower, and so the flooding was all at the south end. So the original strand didn't have a wall. When it was flooded so many times, they put in a big footing. I only know that because we had to fix sewers that ran out to the lifeguards. And so Vernon and I were digging a hole and digging a hole and digging a hole. Said, where does this footing go? And so we found at one end of town it was a different height and so on and so forth. When they redid the Strand, and took about 10 years to redo all the Strand, they started at the south end. They replaced the Strand wall with a poured in place versus concrete blocks. Made a big difference, but they didn't understand what the footing was all about. Or when the waves came in, they were undermining the Strand in some parts of the city. So I think that was a big plus to have the Strand go from no wall to a wall to a new poured in place wall. I think their biggest mistakes, if I would say it's a mistake, is still keeping, and I lost that battle, still keeping the mid-block openings, because with 70 openings, when this water comes across the beach as it did just a couple of weeks back, there are people on the Strand who are going to have ocean water in their front yard. And the more openings you have, the more water is going to come in. So when they had an opportunity to close off the mid-block, and I'm not talking all the openings, I proposed that. It was shot down quicker than before I could finish my sentence because people on the Strand did not wish to have any changes. They didn't want new lights. They didn't want higher lights. They didn't want lights moved. They didn't want lights, and I understand that. Lights were for pedestrian, but they also shine in people's houses. Well, I'm glad.
I want to say right now, whenever the rest of the Strand said we can't have that,
Right.
I would be the only one who would say, "Who do you think you are?"
Thank you, Dorothy. Thank you.
We had a question over here.
Mike, maybe you could tell a story about the Better Windmill and your project.
Thank you. I had the pleasure of being in about 5 or 6 different volunteer groups, along with Mr. Creasy. We had the first one that I met Steve with was the Jarvis Memorial, when Mr. Jarvis was killed in the Voyager Challenger. Steve was a mainstay in developing a memorial. It turned out to be a bike memorial because he was a big biker that rode through Hermosa. So I was part of the team that not only built it, but maintained it long term. It was people that came together all over the place. Steve was a major factor in that, and I appreciate our first meeting. Then after that, I was a member of the, well, for sure, I was a member of the Veterans Memorial. We had again, Steve and I spearheaded a group. It took us several years and funded it all local funding. And then get back to his original statement, I was part of a team that redid the Vetter Windmill. Now, the Vetter Windmill was on the corner of Ardmore and Pier Avenue during the 50s, and maybe earlier than that, during the 40s, 50s, and 60s. And then it was a Conservation Corps, or one of the Corps of Engineers actually moved it from Ardmore up to Greenwood Park. In the 90s, a group of us got together, including Pete Tucker, J.R. Visky, so on and so forth, and we stripped it down, took every piece apart, had a local engineer, former council person, Jack Wood, engineer for us. We then doubled everything, so if it was a 4x4, it became an 8x8. We had a gentleman that came out of the woodwork and drove down to Texas and got us a new tail piece for it. We fabricated all the blades. We built it in the city yard. Fond memories because JR was living across the street. One of my guys put a sign up on the top of the windmill as we stood it up for the very first time. It was always on its side, and put Hermosa Oil Well on it. JR, and if you remember the lady that was spearheading the no oil, lived right across the street. She called JR my little monkey boy because he climbed up and took the sign off and put a stop oil on it. And so I immediately took the windmill down and laid it on the ground so my guys wouldn't fool around with it. Then the following weekend, we installed it up at Greenwood Park. I think my closest to my heart is the Veterans Memorial. That alone took us a couple of years, and it's still, I think, honored by maintaining it all these years. Last but not least, I was involved in 10 years after I retired. I was involved in the Murals Project, and we put up 10 murals in 10 years. It was in a couple hundred. We spent several $100,000 of money, $400,000. Thanks, Steve. Steve was our president. I thought we did a great job of fundraising and development. I worked on every mural, organized it, worked with the city, got the permits, worked with the artists. Some were great. I still get emails from some of our artists. Some of them hope never come back to the city. That being said, it was a great community effort. They'll stay a long time up there. I'm proud of that.
Do you have a favorite mural?
I think the first one, and because I met that's the same artist, Art Mortimer, that writes me emails on a regular basis, invites me to his openings. He's a class act. I think you'll see a skill level that is equal to none in that type of a format. Mm-hmm. I actually rented all the equipment for him, primed it for him, sealed it for him, worked with him side by side. He showed me what painting was all about, hand painting. Mm-hmm. So some of the other artists brought in techniques that had never been done before, including pictures and vellums and things like that.
Yeah, everybody had a different method.
Everybody had a different method.
Applying or painting.
Right. Some of them were painted in their studios and brought down, and we glued them on the surface. All the prep work took me months. And I worked at night until 2 and 3 o'clock in the morning on it because the sun dries the paint too quick. So all the painters mainly painted late in the afternoon or at nighttime.
Okay. And I hear all your experience with Public Works, as you said, really helped out the murals
project.
Well,
it did because by that time I was experiencing contract administration, ordering equipment, dealing with the police department and traffic control. So I was elected to be the chairman of the logistics committee, I guess is what it was called.
So, I mean, I was just kind of thinking back. I know you kind of briefly touched on some events that happened with like the storm of '88, but can you think of another kind of anomaly event that required a lot of stuff from you with Public Works?
Yes. Got a call on a weekend day. There was there was sewage coming out of a manhole at 35th and Hermosa Avenue. I got down there because I was assigned a vehicle. So I got down there within 4 or 5 minutes, and I saw a manhole cover which weighs 75 pounds floating up in the air about a foot above the street.
Oh boy.
It turned out there was a breakdown at the pump. See, Hermosa sewage does not go to Hyperion. It goes to Long Beach. It goes to a pump station in the city of Manhattan and goes up the hill near Rosecrans and then heads south towards Long Beach. And that's the way it was in 1930s and 40s. Remember, this Hyperion station catches sewage from city of LA. So it couldn't be farther from LA. Well, it just so happens there was nobody living in Hermosa Beach. There was 2,000 or 3,000 people living in Hermosa Beach. And so they built the farthest away from LA, but close to the beach area. Anyhow, by the time Hermosa developed sewers in 35 through 40, they had to reroute our sewer system. There's a couple pumps in there. Anyhow, I got down there, I couldn't believe it. It was not our line. It was the county line. And it means that's the route the entire city eventually gets to going north to Manhattan. And so I saw this 24-inch sewer line bubbling up out of the ground. As I investigated further, there were probably 24 houses that had 6 to 8 inches of sewage in their homes. It had backed up all the way down to about 26th Street. And of course, nobody in any other spot in Hermosa knew about it. Their sewage was going down to the north end of town. So I rounded up a crew. We had no idea. The only thing I could do was drain it onto the beach. And I created dikes out on the beach. I dug holes and created dikes out on the beach. Then, with respect to the strand owners, 50% of the strand owners don't live in their houses. They live someplace else. I had to the fire department myself broke through doors to drain people's houses out and flush the water out on the beach where we could collect it for a later point. It was the scariest moment I've ever had, and I've been out at 2 o'clock in the morning with storm water running over the top of me. But that was scary because there was no end in sight. Didn't know what was happening. It was not our sewer line. It was broken. It was the county sewer line. Eventually, the pressure was so great, it broke open the strand at about 22nd Street in Manhattan, flooded the beach out there, took all the pressure off, and it went from a 1-foot-high geyser off the street to nothing. And it instantly just went away. What the heck is going on? Had no idea. So our next chore was to then start sanitizing. That means people's houses, the streets, the beach. I called in as many people as I could. We cordoned off the beach. We dug bigger holes. We pushed water out of people's houses. We pumped water out of people's houses. People had basements full of sewage because they had built restrooms in the basements, which failed. So that was, now even the storm drains, as much as the floods in the 80s and 90s and the water on the Strand and water on Beach Drive and water in people's houses, nothing was as scarier because you're not dealing with salt water, you were dealing with sewage.
Yeah.
What year was that?
In the mid-90s.
So hopefully he was making more than $666 a month.
So and I say that because I wasn't a superintendent until early 90s, so it was well after I was superintendent. And it could have been closer to 2000, but it was the biggest disaster we've ever had. It broke lines. It took us years to find out. We had to hire camera operators. The pressure was so massive. It backed sewage up all the way to our pump stations. The pump station at 35th failed. The pump station down at Hernando failed. Pump station at 33rd failed. The pressure backup damaged everything. And it took me weeks and weeks to get contact with people who lived on the Strand. I said, guess what? Your furniture is floating. Oh, I'll be down there next week. And it was millions of dollars. I'm sure somewhere along the line, they resolved the issue. They had to, it took months.
What caused it?
It was a pump failure at the pump station in Manhattan Beach that then backed everything up, and the back pressure eventually blew out the main sewer line, the 24-inch sewer line underneath the Strand. It's near the lifeguard station. If you look at the lifeguard where the new park is, in that same general area, I can't remember the street. 22nd. 22nd. In that general area, but there's a pump station along with the lifeguard stand and a park system up there, and it's huge. It takes all of Hermosa and half of Manhattan, and pumps it other places.
Maybe somebody flushed a rat.
It was again electrical failure. What it was an electrical failure. The pump stopped. The backup came, and you're pressurized by. There's only a few streets in Redondo to come through Hermosa, but all Hermosa flows from east to west, and then south, and then it's pumped up, and gravity flows north. So the pipes get bigger and bigger and bigger, finally joins the main line for the county, and then goes into Manhattan. Thank you, Manhattan.
Does Manhattan sewage go to Long Beach too?
Some of it does. It all depends on where you're at in the city. It has to do with gravity, natural gravity, and then pump stations.
Tough question, Mike. Have they done anything to mitigate that for the future?
Oh yeah,
we're all concerned.
Well, I think it all had to do with the panel. I think what they did was come up with where you can switch, same way you can switch from battery operated to something on. They have different electrical systems now that they could switch over automatically. Okay. But it was an electrical failure that stopped the pump that kept on having back pressure because there was a gate that closed. It's a backflow gate that closed, and then there was no place for the sewage to go except in the pipe and then get head pressure, and a mile and a half worth of head pressure then blew the pipes out. That was a fun time.
It's very clear to me that you have absolutely become a master at your craft. And I think coupled with your love for that town, that's what really has made you like fantastic, absolutely outstanding. But it kind of begs the question for me, how did it go when you retired? How much did you, so I mean, you became the holder of all this secret knowledge, so how did it go passing it along to somebody?
I'm honored to say that I still get phone calls from city staff members. I'm honored because I happened to hire the existing superintendent twice. The first time, as he was a junior employee, I hired John Cordova. And the second time, I was honored by the city manager asked me to be on a board to hire a new superintendent. And he had left the city for promotion to other cities. So I literally hired him twice, once for maintenance one and once for a superintendent. And so I feel honored that the city calls on me every once in a great while to come up with historic. For example, when they were rebuilding the pier last year, there was a question of the contractor had put in some new handrails, and the handrails within days became warped and all that. Well, they had put in, other than the material that we had on there originally. When I ordered the handrails back in the 80s and 90s, we hired a special type of wood that was recommended to us by the engineer. It was grown in the state of Washington that was made specifically for that type of weather environment, so it didn't warp. And so I asked, he said, "What's the matter?" I said, "Well, did you order this right material?" I said, guess what? There's a bundle of it still in the city yard. Go down there, get all the information, reorder it. And he did so. So I feel honored that I would have an opportunity to relay that what I would call history back to someone who, in town for a couple of years. I feel that way on the Planning Commission, on Public Works Commission. I felt that way on all the other things I've done since I've retired. And I'm also honored that I can call the superintendent and ask him for a favor.
And I will say I've seen even kind of the most stony-faced city staff employees just beam at Mike. I've never seen him smile at anyone else, but they absolutely smile at Mike. So, Jim, you had a question?
Like, do you have cards that say sewer consultant?
Well, the good news is I was part of the team that hired a video camera company, part of the team that hired a Vector truck. One of the reasons why the sewer system was in dire need, not only it wasn't being cleaned properly, it couldn't be cleaned properly with the rotting. We were responding to emergencies versus proactively looking at doing things. Same with street cleaning. If you don't have the right equipment, you can't do it. I did a test one time for the council for street sweeping, and in 1 week's time, we had 4 tons of material off our city streets. And that's the justification for street sweeping. It's not just making tickets or doing that, but there's 4 tons of material. I would say that 40% of it is sand, windblown stuff, but you can't put that sand back on the beach. It has to be trashed. It has to be landfilled because it's debris inside the sand. I tried to separate it at the yard to save us some trash stuff. Can't be separated. The materials are just plastic and so on and so forth. So I'm proud of things that I encumbered. The backside of that is I had to lay off people to hire other people. I was lucky to find almost 80% of the people that I contracted their services out, street sweeping, sewer maintenance, parks, janitorial services. That was my first assignment as a superintendent. I had to look at all my employees and say, we have to find other jobs for you. I moved them to other departments. I was lucky. I was really lucky. And other people saw the handwriting and went other places. But that was a big heartache for me, to be my first assignment, to contract out my employees. But I was proud of what I did do, of hiring up-to-date new equipment, up-to-date new technology, so on and so forth.
Rick, you had a question?
Yeah, actually, Mike is a resource. You got to stick around for a while.
Well, that's my goal.
A couple of years ago, one of my Kiwanis members said, it was after a big rainstorm, she goes, our sump pump just keeps running and running and running, and it's all of our neighbors, all over Hermosa Avenue and everything. We've had people out, nobody could figure out where to look. Drop a dime, call Mike. He goes, let me guess, does she live at like 7th and Hermosa Avenue? I said, how on earth did you know that? He said, well, that's where the water table's only about 2 feet away. It's because of the storm, and it'll go away after a week or 2.
Yeah.
They were going to spend thousands of dollars digging stuff up to make it back.
Oh, gosh.
And that's why, along with Jim Rosenberger's suggestion about superintendent consultant or sewer consultant, as many years as I've known you, Mike, what's my nickname for you? I think most of you are old enough to know the Honeymooners. And so my nickname for him is Ed Norton. He knows all the sewers under this city, knows where everything is. So he's always Ed Norton.
So technology's come a long way. What's a toy that Public Works, not a toy, a tool, a tool that Public Works has now that you're jealous of?
Well, the skip loader, not the skip loader, but we had the first tractor we had on the beach, didn't have a roll bar, didn't have an enclosure. You sat in an open with your rain jacket on, opening up storm drains. The last piece of equipment they bought is a rubber tired unit that we can actually drive off the beach. And the reason being is, again, one of my chores as superintendent, I refuse to have them drive the dump truck and the trailer that we used to haul down with the Caterpillar down on the beach because it didn't have brakes on it. I said, not under my watch. And so we built an enclosure on the beach for our tracked loader. And the salt air, we had to hire the County of Los Angeles with a D8, which is as big as this building, to drag it off the beach. But so then we started to buy a piece of equipment. I think that's, if I'm jealous, that's a jealous one. But the other equipment they have today, a sign maker, the small jitneys, the small loaders, the equipment is no longer have holes in the floor where the fumes would get you. A vehicle replacement was a key in we can keep vehicles for 10, 12 years, but not 20. And that, I think, I'm not jealous, I'm happy for them that they have a vehicle replacement system going, that people ride around in safe vehicles, that nobody's driving a truck and a tractor and a 40-ton piece of equipment down the road with no brakes. And
or gas coming up through the fumes coming up through the,
right.
Absolutely. Elka?
What do you see as the biggest challenge going forward for Public Works? Besides the city yard?
Besides the city yard, keeping the employees they have today, because quite frankly, if I'm jealous of anything, it's the employees they have in the city yard today. All of them. And it's not just because I'm not telling them what to do. All of them respond well in public, greet citizens in public, are skillful, and there's more of them. And that was one of my biggest hubbub. I mean, racing from one end of town, I was the second person in the city of Hermosa to be assigned a cell phone, because I went to the city manager, actually my director did, and I was tired of spending quarters at a telephone booth calling back when they paged me on my pager. And he looked at me and said, I'm giving a new cell phone to the head of detectives and you. And you'll see a copy of that phone in the historic records up there at the Historical Society. It's that big thing. It weighed about 4 or 5 pounds.
That one was yours?
No, that was the police.
Oh, the same one.
That was the same one.
Oh,
they ordered
okay.
2 of them. One was for the detective sergeant, and one was for me.
You want to tell them what happened to your cell phone the day you retired at the Mermaid?
No. Okay. This is telling stories out of school. My cell phone, not bill, but number of phone calls was quadruple or 10 times more than anyone else in the city, including detectives. I had 200 phone calls a week. So on the day of my retirement, I took a phone that I described as my cell phone, opened up a manhole right next to the Mermaid, and threw it in the sewer. It was not my real phone. I had to give that one in. But it was Rick and myself went down there. I told them what I was going to do. It was a phone with no guts in it. It would just float away.
And now it lives in Long Beach.
You don't want to tell them who you call?
I know. That's still between you and me, Rick.
We're keeping it PG today.
Yeah.
If he wants to keep his consultant agreement with the city. So, and then what is your fondest memory of Hermosa? And this doesn't have to be Public Works related.
No. Well, obviously I had a lot of fond memories. Meeting my wife was one. Meeting people at local bars in the early 70s. Actually enjoying the multitude of groups I was part of. The dart team at the saloon. Playing volleyball with people on the beach. Living on the Strand was a real experience for me. I could afford it. I mean, I was paying $125 a month for a second story, 16th Street, 2-bedroom apartment. Obviously, in the late 70s, my salary was, I could not afford the Strand anymore. But I did enjoy all my neighbors. When Jackie and I got together, our neighborhood is as good as it gets as far as I'm concerned. I have some of my fond neighbors right in front of me today. I think we have one of the oldest activities in the city of Hermosa. We have a barbecue, a 4th of July is no longer the 4th of July, but a chili cook-off that's 40 some years old now. There's only a few things on the city beach, such as the volleyball tournament next to your place, and some other things that are older than that activity. So those are my fondest memories, actually.
Ooh, those are good ones.
Working the saloon was quite an activity.
Yeah, I heard we haven't covered all that, so maybe we'll have to have a second edition of Mike Uncovered for all of those stories. We have another question from Nicole in the back.
As you helped the town of Hermosa, what made you want to get involved in the sister city and then help them as well?
Well, actually, that came through Hermosa. I was part of I worked with the fire department quite a bit, and they introduced me to Sister City when they went down to Loretto. And I met George Barks the day after he lost the election, when he was not reelected for the 4th time. And I was absolutely surprised. He was working on a Sister City program. And I said, George, why didn't you take a day off? You just worked your ass off. You didn't get elected. What are you doing here? And he encouraged me just by his dedication. I said, wow, I have to look into this group. So he actually inspired me to, in some degree, but my participation with the fire department and the people I met in the fire department who were paramedics that were so dedicated. Those 3 gentlemen I worked with my whole career. That was part of it. So George introduced me with his dedication. In fact, I actually gave him a separate room all by himself in the community center, where we still had there was a copy of a church that was brought up from Loretto that was in City Hall, and Steve said to me, Mike, what can we do with this? I said, I'll find a nice place to protect it. So I found a room in the community center, an old locker room that is now part of city storage, and each group was assigned. So I found a nice spot for George Sister City, which included all his stuff, and that's where I saw him that day, and I was so impressed by his dedication to cities. And again, I had already been involved with Rotary and Kiwanis and so on and so forth, so that's how I got introduced.
Dorothy?
I don't have a question, but I have a comment. I think I'm going to call Rome and talk to the Pope and see if we can canonize you as Saint Mike of Hermosa. And then put up some fine something for you. I think we should do it.
Me and Bob.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Man of the Year was not enough. Does anybody have any other questions for Mike?
I am honored, guys. Thank you very much. And I see people that I've known many, many, many years. Some people I met the first day.
Incredible.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mike. I really appreciate you coming out.
Thank you.
And we will have to get together again so that we can record the off the record stories. So for the museum archive, of course. So thank you everybody for coming. Thank you again so much to Fred for being the most fantastic host in town. If you haven't grabbed a coffee from inside, make sure to come back and get one tomorrow morning.